Kate Falcha, welcome to Irish Granny Helen. It's time for our Saturday book, and we are slogging our way through this really disturbing book, Opus, by Gareth Gore. This is the story of the cult of dark money, human trafficking, right-wing conspiracy inside the Catholic Church. Revelatory, and as I said, very disturbing. This is a dense book. This was quite a job going through it, and I'm still not finished, although I kind of know how it ends. It's eye-opening, and it should scare all of us right down to our bone marrow about what's going on here. This is a religious coup for theocracy. Not exaggerating. Okay, we are well into this book, and if you haven't watched the first 6 videos, I've done longer books, be sure and build up to it, because there's quite the background story. This has its roots in fascist Spain. Okay, and somehow we end up in Washington, D.C. Isn't that remarkable? Okay. Video number 7. Oh, to give you my video number 7. Sorry. Chapter 11, A Marriage of Convenience. So we've got Senator Brownback and Rick Santorum, who are champions of the religious right. They're trying to get an amendment passed to force schools to stop teaching evolution. This is a while back. They were both considered strong possibilities for the 2008 Republican presidential candidacy. Brownback is an anti-marriage equity person, same-sex marriage. So what they're really doing here with this stop teaching evolution is they're trying to get the people who don't really think stirred up emotionally, the Republicans that they think would be behind this, to stir up the conservatives before the midterms. Brownback was extremely conservative and a member of Opus Dei. Father McCloskey had worked on him to believe that it was God's will that God be his number one constituent, and his senatorial loyalty should be to God, not the people he represented, not the people who voted him in to speak for them. No, he should be speaking about his beliefs to God and please God before the people. And he now told people at this time, it's a while ago, he told people that, this is in the early 2000s, that he was devoting all of his time in the Senate to pleasing and serving God. There was a great deal of alarm in conservative circles as states contemplated legalizing same-gender marriage. Massachusetts was the first, and this stirred up the whole debate. The people against it, their argument was, well, this is going to weaken marriage. There's nothing like marriages to weaken marriage. That it harms the family and children, and that it harms the republic. They even wanted an anti-same-sex marriage amendment to the Constitution that included precluding states doing anything about it, blocking states' rights to do anything about it. And they actually described this out loud as taking power from the liberal cabal. They argued the laws against it were the voice of the people, which is untrue. When they did polls, it was like 80-something% popular. But the Opus Dei had been fine with stifling the voice of the people through court cases. If it's something they wanted, they would be happy to stifle. Conservative students argued that the poor and minorities suffered from a divorce or kids being born out of wedlock, or the fact that there were fewer marriages, that this was damaging to the United States, and that marriage benefits society. No one wanted to talk about the economic inequities that kept single mothers and minorities poor. They didn't want to look at that. This is called correlation, misconstrued as causation. Just because two things happen at the same time doesn't mean one causes the other. Oh, it's not students, it was study. That's why I was looking. I can't read my handwriting. I'm trying to decipher. It's like a foreign language I've written in. So this study that they were claiming was saying it destroys families and it's bad for kids, blah, blah, blah. This study was put out by a right-wing group that met at an Opus Dei conference. They held it at Princeton to give it cachet. And the name, the theme of this conference was why marriage is in the public interest. So the first major project of the Witherspoon Institute, this is Opus Dei led group. It was created by Opus Dei, a numerary who was told to get as much Opus Dei influence as possible in U.S. universities. So this was their first drive towards that. Opus Dei would spread its influence. They were obsessed with using what they call the Spanish model. Build a big Opus Dei university. Don't worry if there's no real academics going on, just the illusion of an academic environment. And create a network of feeder schools so that you would have high schools and grade schools associated with different areas, and get Opus Dei influence strong in those smaller schools and use them to direct applicants into the Opus Dei University. They didn't care about the academics. Once they got them there, they were going to brainwash them to be recruits. So Brownback, the senator, he got connected to academics who he knew were pushing a conservative Catholic interpretation of natural law. They were saying that certain truths were inherent in human consciousness, and these truths being, of course, Catholic truths. And they pushed for state laws against all the sins. Just name it. They were against it, especially anything sexual. And they pushed right-wing morality. So everybody is ruled by natural law. Natural law is all about truths. The truths are all right-wing values, and they're all obsessed with what they call sins against sexuality. And they also pushed the end of abortion, and they wanted capital punishment. They believed that morality should be legislated. They were considered activist conservatives, and this is what this senator was. Opus Dei was in a battle to end all hard-won progressive rights. They somehow fooled a humanist atheist scholar in a school into letting Opus Dei's foundation, the Clover Foundation, to set up a postdoctoral chair in humanities at Princeton. So they bamboozled this guy, and it gave Opus Dei a foot in the door of higher education, and it was Ivy League. This is a big deal. They fooled a history professor into creating in the year 2000, the James Madison program. This is what this thing would be called. And it would later play a critical role in dismantling the rights of women, LGBTQ community, and minorities. It was a beachhead for Opus Dei. And I think we can pretty much stipulate that Opus Dei is now the extreme right wing of Catholicism. Conservatives are too liberal for them, and they are absolutely in the forefront of this push for social takeover. And they said this themselves. This is not me interpreting. So even if, okay, let me see here. The James Madison program pushed conservative interests, but worse than conservative. They wanted to solve the political correctness problem. So even if 90% of tenured elite college professors were woke, they said that we can set up a small enclave with more conservative views. They got a billionaire, Steve Forbes, to donate money. Forbes was mad at Princeton because they had hired an Australian guy named Singer. I remember when this happened, I had a friend who was real born again, and she had a fit about this guy. And I think that he was intentionally provocative. I think he would come up with really crazy ideas just to get at people. So Singer was all upset for it. For one thing, he was into vegetarianism and he pushed it. He believed in giving money to the poor. But he was also, they call this effective altruism movement. It was movement, you know. But Singer supported abortion rights. He also supported euthanasia rights. And this scares the liver out of conservatives. And it really outraged them. And Forbes was super outraged. So with Forbes and the Smith family, we talked about them earlier. I don't really, so many names at this point, but they're rich people. They used their money in 2003 to the Witherspoon Institute, and its intention was to push conservative thought. They were big on religion's role in society, big on Opus Dei support. They gave it lots of money. They created a network of foundations as conduits. So we're kind of repeating ourselves here, but these new things come up. And I know that in the context of the book, if you're if you're worried about facts, no, if you're trying to remember details, they have to mention the names of everything and be really specific. But for our purposes, since this is a synopsis, all we really need to know is that multiple times rich people stepped up, either aware of what they were doing or being fooled into it, and they gave a ton of money, sometimes thinking it was to a foundation or a think tank or an organization, but it was all Opus Dei manipulation. There was one in New York City that was infiltrating the media and entertainment. Witherspoon benefited. James Madison Institute benefited. They had deniability. We don't take money from Opus Dei. We got it from that foundation. What are you talking about? The executive director of Witherspoon was a supernumerary and extremely vocally anti-gay marriage. Opus Dei kept a facade of this benign, devout, Roman Catholic group that kept to themselves, and that was the farthest thing from the truth. Now, if you remember Bolin, I believe his name was Mark Bolin, he was proud that they'd gotten numeraries to launch what they called the Apostolic Initiative. So they had foundations. This is, create a foundation, feed Opus Dei the money from it, raise recruits. It's just pro forma at this point. Tellez denied recruiting and he denied pressure to join Opus Dei, that it existed. He said, I'm simply a facilitator. He pushed what he called nice conservatism, respectful of other people's viewpoints, into serious scholarship, being able to engage in dialogue without invective, like don't be too obviously oppositional. This new crop of students was not aware when they came that there had previously been scandals in the Ivy Leagues with the Opus Dei. The new head of the Catholic Information Center in DC, a guy called Father Stetson, which cracked me up, he was not really great with recruiting. He didn't do great work. Attendance at Mass went down, recruiting went down. He just wasn't a people person. And they even had to borrow money, get rent money from the New York headquarters for the Washington, D.C. Catholic Information Center. And this is even while conservative Catholics had big jobs in the Bush administration. Things were not the same after John Paul II died. In 2005, he was sick. Opus Dei cardinals in Rome started campaigning under the covers for Ratzinger. Remember him? We'll just move forward. Once Ratzinger was picked, Opus Dei wrote to him about what his priorities as Pope should be. So despite efforts, the Opus Dei numbers were still going down. Father Stetson in D.C. was replaced by Father Panula, a big deal in Opus Dei. He joined from Harvard. He lived next to Escriva in Spain for a long time. He had become an Opus Dei priest in Rome. He was a big shot. He was a chaplain at the Heights, the boys' school, the Opus Dei boys' school in Washington, D.C. And I put a lot of exclamation points in the margins here. I think this is something we should all give some thought to and be worried about. He spent some time in California, where he was a close friend of Peter Thiel. They shared a disdain for government, for the danger of liberal politics, like things like affirmative action. They blamed all social ills on liberal thought. They blamed the clergy. I have to be careful what I say here. They blamed the illegal activities clergy were accused of and found guilty of as the result of liberalizing the mass. Seriously. They're not saying it in Latin anymore. Let's everybody go out and commit those kind of crimes, right? They said that they caused confusion for the priests. Peter Thiel complained at the same time of the slow growth of tech in the 70s. And the priest, his Opus Dei buddy, blamed the slow growth of tech in the 70s on Roe v. Wade, because it was eliminating future citizens that might cure cancer. I kid you not, that's a quote. So in Washington, D.C., he became the spiritual advisor for Arthur Brooks, who was the head of the American Enterprise Institute, a conservative think tank with a lot of influence with the Republicans. Cut taxes, rein in the government, that whole thing. This guy's first name was Arna. Father Arna was a friend and a confidant to billionaires and Supreme Court justices. That's how he was often described. He was also close to Leonard Leo in high school. Leonard Leo, now he's a problematic character, and if you really want to hear the true scoop on Leonard Leo, read Greg Olear. He has a particular animus for Leonard Leo, and he expresses it beautifully. In high school, Leonard Leo was described as most likely to succeed in the yearbook. There are photos of him and his future wife. They were high school sweethearts, with wads of cash and dollar signs painted on their glasses in high school. His nickname was Moneybags Kid. I don't know. You have to be slapped in the face to understand. I'm speaking metaphorically, YouTube. He was very religious. He went to Cornell, which is conservative, and a lot of conservative academics that he went into the government. And there was the strong influence of Robert Bork and Scalia. They were building the case at the time while he was there for originalism, which, if I understand it correctly, says go back to the exact words of the founders, primary source material, their exact words, and don't regard the Constitution as sort of a living document that will adapt to the time. Leo interned in the last years of the Reagan administration. Then he went to law school, and in 89, he created a chapter of the Federalist Society. This was the burgeoning new group. This was created to challenge liberal ideology in national law schools. This comes directly out of the Seven Mountain Mandate. We can bring about permanent Christian social change, and one of the places that we have to affect is the law, and let's start with the students. And that's what they did. He married his high school sweetheart. They went to DC. He clerked for an appeals judge. He was very close to Clarence Thomas. Keep that in mind. Opus Dei, Leonard Leo, Federalist Society, Dark Money, Clarence Thomas. Direct circular link. He was hired as the first official employee of the Federal Society. He helped Thomas get confirmed. He essentially ignored the tenets of his Roman Catholic faith to push a conservative into the court for control of the court. We all know what happened with the allegations. With patrons like the Kochs, Richard Mellon, Skyfe, I forget who he is, but he's a big money bags. Frank Hanna. The Federalist Society became a breeding ground for conservative judges. They recruited in schools. They groomed and bound together into a career pipeline the young people going into the law that they felt would be malleable and would toe the line. For example, John Roberts. For example, Alito. They formed the Judicial Confirmation Network, a nonprofit bankrolled by a guy called the Foreclosure King. Now that's something to be proud of. His name was Robert Arkley, and this whole thing was thought up by Leo and Scalia. Oh, I see what I did. I wrote over my writing accidentally, and that's why I can't read it. His name is Corkery, and Corkeries are really important to this whole story, so keep that name in mind. They were supernumeraries of Opus Dei. Okay, so now they're running this network, trying to control judiciary confirmations. So manipulating the legislature, public opinion, money, to get Opus Dei clutches in the law and in the judicial system. They later channeled, the Corkeries later channeled tons of dark money for Leonard Leo. Leo had Thomas and Alito. He befriended Scalia, who was also close to Opus Dei. So that's 3 judges. Leo used connections, political, federal, Opus Dei, to support religious causes that were important to conservatives. Bush made him the representative to the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. Oh, the irony. And their job was to police religious freedom around the world. They had no money. Leo used this as an opportunity to travel the globe, hunting for anti-Christian persecution to go after. He was quick to defend Christians in whatever situation. Don't want to bake a cake, it's not your fault. But he didn't defend any other religions. Just Christianity was being prejudiced against it. He had a colleague who sued him for firing her because she was Muslim. A whole bunch of staff members quit in protest for her, agreeing with her that it was unfair. It was so bad that he got fired. Leo got fired. But he was such an obsessed zealot. He saw himself as a serious political figure at this point. So that job, who cares? I'm a martyr to the cause. So the Federalist Society was having its 25th anniversary. And, all the honoraries were on the stage, and Leo was up on the stage with Scalia, Thomas, Alito. Roberts sent a videotaped message, and so did Bush. He saw religious signs and omens everywhere that he believed, and he said this, he believed that they were messages from his dead daughter to encourage him to increase the Opus Dei work that he was doing. She died. She was born with issues. I don't remember, but she was not an infant. I think she may have been a teenager. It's very sad. It's very sad. In 2008, conservatives were in despair because of Obama. They were so afraid that a Democrat in the White House would do all kinds of damage to like their pro-life thing and their anti-gay thing. An archbishop with an Opus Dei, who was with Opus Dei, publicly warned that Obama was pro-abortion, and he called Obama an abortion extremist. Tellez had a new project, the National Organization for Marriage. And with Opus Dei's help, he raised millions of dollars. It bankrolled an effort to outlaw same-sex marriage in California. It passed the day Obama was elected. California Proposition 8 said that marriage is one man and one woman. It was successful because it got huge amounts of money for the National Organization for Marriage. This was called grassroots, but there was big money behind it. It came from a very small number of very rich, religiously motivated people, and they had an agenda. For example, a lot of its support came from the Knights of Columbus. This is no grassroots organization. The Knights of Columbus are some weird dudes. They run around in feathered hats with swords at their waist, in the suburbs of a Sunday morning right before the pancake breakfast. And they were also supported by, that small little grassroots organization, the Mormon Church. And of course, Opus Dei supported. This is the marriage group. They used fake blue-collar conservative communication agency for their public relations. They, put on this image of, we're just, we're just folks. But that wasn't what was going on. They were big on doing disinformation campaigns. They were in charge of the Swift boat thing with John Kerry, for example. The president of the Public Relations Agency went into business with Leonard Leo, to stack the Supreme Court. They were a major donor to the Washington, D.C. Catholic Information Center. Their TV ad was The Gathering Storm. It cost $1.5 million to make this ad. It was produced by the National Organization for Marriage. They badmouthed gay marriage, this is what they said. I don't believe it. It's not true. This is what they said, YouTube. That they stole kids and stole religious freedom away from people. The vitriol for the gay community was terrible. They talked about, I'm not going to go into it. I'll get in trouble with YouTube because they don't understand nuance. So I don't believe this stuff. This is what these guys were saying in their ads on television. Evil is always with us. It requires constant vigilance. This is against human nature. The new National Organization for Marriage chair was a name that may sound familiar to you, John Eastman, the lawyer who went on to be the advisor for you-know-who and was indicted for his role trying to overturn the 2020. Tellez was working on what was called the American Principles Project. Let's read about this little venture. Expose Obama as a social radical, develop side issues to weaken pro-gay marriage political leaders and parties, develop an activist base of socially conservative voters, raise issues like pornography, protection of children, the need to oppose all efforts to weaken religious liberty at the federal level. This is the mission of the American Principles Project. They wanted to put put millions of dollars into election battles all over the country. They were rallying for re-Christianization of America. And who was leading the call? Opus Dei. Okay, chapter 12, There Be Dragons. Now we're talking Argentina, 2009. Roland Joffe was the director of The Killing Fields, the movie, one of my favorite movies. The Mission, another one of my favorite movies. But he was now being courted out of retirement with an offer of $40 million from Opus Dei to make a movie about Escrivá, Saint Jose Maria, the founder, the name of the movie. An Opus Dei film company had been created in the 90s by Portillo, and it was called The Work LLC. The original script that they came up with for the founder was not regarded well. It was considered too pro-Franco. So it was rewritten, and funding from Opus Dei was disguised as coming from a golden investor in a foundation in Spain. The film's new name was There Be Dragons. Opus Dei hubris was on display, bringing frequent visits of the crew and the cast, etc., to the close Argentinian residence, the site of the largest, most ruthless Opus Dei slave labor operation in the world. The property was a gift to Opus Dei from the military junta in 1972 in Argentina, as it disappeared tens of thousands of people and separated children from their families and gave them off in adoption to right-wing people. Many of the numerous assistants at the numerary assistants were recruited from the poorest as young as 12 years old, lured to what they were told was a better life in the hospitality sector. They were from Uruguay, Paraguay, Bolivia. Often border crossings were facilitated by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, by the government. They came on government planes often. It's mind-boggling. They were told their family would be rewarded in heaven or punished in hell, depending on what they chose to do for Opus Dei. It was a life of servitude. There was a grueling schedule of work and prayer. They cleaned up after the men. They served food. They did cleaning, all at facilities. And then in their free time, they recruited more girls. The exploitation was backbreaking. They had no basic rights. This was an abuse of power coerced by fear on the part of Opus Dei. They had no days off. They had quotas to fulfill as far as volume of work. This might be triggering to some people. I'll just warn you. They were measured in things like the number of shirts they ironed in an hour. Some ended up engaging in self-harm. The only break that they got, and this is just, this just blows my mind. The only break they got was when they went to mass or confession. There was one kind priest, a Father Danilo, and he was removed from his position because he was too good to them. And he was later found on the train tracks with a note, "Tell Opus Dei of my death at my own hands." The police went to the residence and were told that no priest by that name was there. So no. You know what this implies. So even as the film people went in and out of the residence, the domestics suffered. They took more than 10 years after this point to bring their plight to light. They had a film crew in and out all day long, and they didn't notice anything. In post-production, it took a year in Europe. It was a complete flop. The New York Times called it a windy posturing, a fawning biography. There Be Dragons belongs to a realm devoid of flesh and blood, where vacuous oratory reigns and religiosity passes for faith. The village voice was no less critical. Joffy's inexplicable penchant for tear-jerking Catholic mysticism makes dragons more punishing than 100 Hail Marys. So, sorry, I shouldn't laugh. It grossed $4 million globally. The Vatican spokesperson that, was given the job lavished false praise and claims of thanks for the good that came from it. But if there may be dragons, but there won't be Oscars. At the New York, at the site of the renovated $18 million Russian dance school across from Carnegie Hall, they established the IFSE, and that's an acronym for a bunch of Spanish words. It's a Spanish business school, and it had a grand opening for the corporate elite. They wanted to be the first European institution to offer MBAs in the United States. Corporate executives came and were told about innovation and creativity. It had been named the #1 business school in the world by The Economist. No one mentioned the Opus Dei chapel upstairs or the deep links to the school that Opus Dei had with the school since 1958. It was called the Apostolic Mission of Opus Dei by Escrivá, with a goal to groom a new generation of businessmen whose priority was religious values overall. At the beginning, they got loans from Luis. After 5 years, it allied with Harvard Business School to launch the first 2-year MBA program in Europe. By the time of the grand opening of this, former Russian ballet school in New York City in 2010, they had a global network going. The young professors in the program were targets for Opus Dei recruitment. It became a huge opportunity for Opus Dei to infiltrate the top of the business world. They'd been bought by Opus Dei's Clover Foundation, a major source of money for Opus Dei. And it had paid to expand the Villa Tevere in Rome. In 2007, the Clover Foundation received $50 million from an entity in the British Virgin Islands. It was set up through Panama and Panamanian law, a law firm known to facilitate hiding money. The Clover Foundation had bought the New York building and rented it to the business school far below market price. That had financial links to Opus Dei as well and was very obscured. A typical way Opus Dei controlled it. They had $600 million in assets. And they got it through 100 different foundations. Most were small, but it also included the Association for Cultural Interchange, Incorporated, which since the 1950s had managed huge assets and portfolios, all associated with Opus Dei, but well disguised. Let's see here, what nefarious thing can we read about now? The foundation purported to provide a program of support and assistance to other not-for-profit organizations. This sort of thing is described so well by Senator Whitehouse. I think it's called The Scheme. I covered it ages ago. And the flowchart of how these organizations intertwine and connect, and you'd be hard pressed to figure out who was paying who, where the money was coming from, what it was being used for, and it's intentional. They're obfuscating their whole financial dealings. So other nonprofit organizations that promote international understanding, the exchange of ideas, and cultural activities that promote the dignity of the human person. A closer look at his finances revealed an almost symbiotic relationship with Opus Dei. Its board was filled with the same cast of numerary men, Tellez, Nagore, who were in charge of, he was in charge of overseeing the global finances of Opus Dei from Rome. They were also named as directors at Clover and in dozens of other supposedly independent foundations. You'd see images of children, smiling children from Africa in their promotional materials, but a little teeny tiny, like, $10,000 would go to one of these places in Africa, and the rest was going into the coffers of Opus Dei. Some people with it, Clover and others, were all Opus Dei members, and it talks about advertising with smiling children. They might get 10 or 20,000 of the 30 million that went to the property on Villa Trevere to build a new residence. Most Opus Dei associated foundations bragged about their charity, but it was nominal. They gave enormous sums to Opus Dei projects and buildings aimed at recruitment. By 2010, there were 88,000 members in 66 countries, a huge network of schools and residences, with Opus Dei priests told to provide spiritual formation of kids and the young. Get them young, brainwashing. This was all done with care to disguise any connection to Opus Dei, but almost all were coordinated with Rome, who sent orders to the regional Opus Dei governments, and they passed them on to the individuals who ran the NGOs, the charities, the foundations, the schools, etc., with no mention, nothing obvious, that this was coming directly on orders from Rome and Opus Dei. No mention of association with Opus Dei. There was this fictitious independence. And this worked both ways. It protected them. They were able to argue they have no connection to them. And Opus Dei was able to duck criminal charges. They claimed responsibility for the spiritual formation of people, but we don't breach labor laws, or we're not involved in enslavement or labor or any such thing. Let's see how we're doing here. Okay. They were completely absolved of responsibility. The numeraries who ran the residences and the schools, they faced serious charges and possible prison often when this fraud, which was just ongoing, came to light. Or they could get fired from whatever job they were in. A lot of the suits got thrown out when the complainants were found to have been paid a salary, but there was no mention of the fact, they're not enslaved, they're getting paid a salary. But there was no mention of the fact that there was a whole system in place where every paycheck went back to Opus Dei. They were forced to write blank checks to Opus Dei foundations from their paychecks. Opus Dei got complaints from numeraries about abuses in the residence. They've been forced to leave their careers by Opus Dei. They were moved around by Opus Dei, kept away from family and friends. They worked long hours without pay. They had no unemployment benefits, no pensions. If they got sick, they were out, and that was it, no help. They were trapped because it lacked means to start a new life. They were stripped of any economic independence. When they left Opus Dei washed their hands of any responsibility for these people that they had used incredibly. Opus Dei would say, "You appear to be confusing the role of Opus Dei in your life with that of your legal employer," wrote one superior to a numerary in England who had left. Opus Dei never has, and I believe never will, actually employ people. And people who work in its residences or the catering departments of those residents are employed by a legal body that owns them. I haven't owns the residents, but they do own the people. I have investigated all these bodies for any reference to your name as an employee and have drawn a complete blank. So they just weasel their way out of it. It's reprehensible. It's stunning. The discontent amongst the numeraries began to grow in the late 2000s. The electors who made the top decisions, they were the hand-picked sycophants. They weren't about to deal with the accusations of abuses. They covered them up. For example, Father Manuel Cochina from Spain, who was a big shot, thought very possibly could be the next head of Opus Dei. He was accused of years of misbehavior. The Opus Dei just moved him, and he was eventually found guilty of everything he had been accused of. For example, numeraries who complained were summoned to Rome, sent to an Opus Dei priest, an Opus Dei doctor, and given pills. Pope Benedict told Opus Dei to drop the requirement that members could only confess to Opus Dei priests. Stop spying on your members. Opus Dei told the membership, but described it as they were clarifying a misunderstanding, and they moved the teachers that were accused of anything. Kids were never protected. They had a vast network of organizations, foundations, institutions, schools used to shield the accused. Opus Dei would put anyone at risk to protect the organization and hide its crimes. At the time, by the 2010s, Catholics had risen in number by 1.2 billion in the world. But the number of priests was plummeting. There were 50,000 dioceses with no priests. In the United States by that time, the number of priests was down by a third. Opus Dei, the priests were up twice as much. The Banco that had subsidized seminaries and paid their cost of living for the priests, so it was easier to get Opus Dei priests because it was all, paid for. They were becoming a force in the Vatican, Opus Dei, just because of the numbers, attrition, and because of the money they had. They had 24 Opus Dei bishops by now globally and 2 cardinals. In April of 2010, Opus Dei priest became an Opus Dei priest became the Archbishop of Los Angeles, the largest diocese in North America. Father Arne, over in the Catholic Information Center, he began to push for higher donations, and he came up with some creative ways of doing it. He had an annual awards dinner, and it drew in the rich DC Catholics to win the John Paul II Award. And the first one was given to Cardinal Real, I can't pronounce it, the Archbishop of DC, who's a very popular conservative. Recently, he had signed the Manhattan Declaration, an ecumenical statement telling Christians, don't comply with laws if they don't go along with your beliefs. The second award the next year went to the biographer who wrote a biography of John Paul II, who was the book was really big with conservative Roman Catholics. Other yearly recipients as time went by included the Supreme Head of the Knights of Columbus and Justice Scalia. Father Arne thought about creating the Leonine Forum, which was for top graduates to capture the minds of the leaders of tomorrow. Opus Dei never was mentioned in their promotional material. The goal was to transform politics, to reverse secularism, and to put Opus Dei at the center of American government. Now, keep in mind that parallel to this is the White Christian National push for the Seven Mountain Mandate, the Mike Johnsons of the world. So you have Leonard Leo for the Catholics, Mike Johnson and his ilk, and he has plenty of people behind him for the evangelicals, I guess you call them. Tellus helped advance this whole goal. The American, excuse me, sorry, the American Principles Project, they had a political action committee, a PAC. They gave millions to candidates and causes that were aligned with conservative Catholic agenda. The goal was to reshape Republican policies and to conform to Catholic. And in 2011, they sponsored a TV debate of the Republican presidential candidates. After Obama won, the Republican National Convention looked into the campaign and decided the Republican needed to be more welcoming and inclusive on issues like gay rights and immigration. And the American Principles Project, they freaked out. They pushed back. What do you mean? More soft, more inclusive? You must be crazy. They did their own report headed by, wait for it, Kellyanne Conway, and she said the exact opposite. They pumped money into races to advance conservative principles, and this is what helped kick out Liz Cheney. They were responsible. They went on stealth missions to shape policy and get more money and influence. For example, they got $700,000 to study the impact of gay parenting. And they were desperate to get the notion of gay parents to the Supreme Court. And they're still pushing for that. I'm telling you, I made my prediction. It was debunked, this effort, but they're not done. They rallied more Catholics around them. For example, $1.4 million for a Vatican conference on the complementarity of men and women. Leonard Leo was being courted by Opus Dei through the Catholic Information Center activities. And up until now, he's been on a roll himself, but they invited him to their board, to be on their board. His kids went to Opus Dei schools, and he donated thousands of dollars to the schools. Also, he was more political, actively, publicly political with Clarence and Ginny Thomas. For example, they very publicly opposed the building of the Islamic Center on 9/11 site. He was a board member. He joined the Catholic Information Center board in a lawsuit against the Obama administration requiring that employees provide contraception, sterilization, and abortion medical coverage in their insurance. Leonard Leo was growing with Opus Dei and the political dark money connections. Pat Cipollone, I think that's how it's pronounced. Remember him from 2020? He was an assistant to Bill Barr. He was on the board. In 2014, now we're talking the Catholic Information Center, the Opus Dei thing. 2014, Bill Barr was put on the board. So Leo's connection from Opus Dei to the government and to conservative billionaires was, closing the loop. He formed a coalition to reshape the American society and destroy the hard-earned civil rights of the great, what was it called? LBJ's, war on poverty and civil rights and voting rights, all that stuff that happened then. They're calling this move to get rid of these progressive gains the Great Awakening. They did a study that said that the world was not what they'd been promised. Students were very upset that things were not as they'd been promised, and they called it a betrayal. A bill of secular progressive goods sold to them and by society, and Opus Dei would guide them to a new world. But the Great Awakening of these Christians, Catholics, it arose from dark money networks. And as the Banco in Spain failed, Opus Dei found new sources of income in the United States. They tied and cemented relationships between Opus Dei and the Supreme Court. Scalia was deeply involved with them. With Leo's network of dark money, Opus Dei penetrated the political and judicial world at unprecedented levels, a dark portent of things to come. And we will end this video here because the next chapter, I'm actually I'm working on this next chapter, and I'm contemplating maybe actually putting it in my membership because it's going to be triggering. That's all I can say. And I would invite you, if I do that, and I'm doing it for my own well-being, I would invite you to join my membership, if only, to see that one video, and it's 99 cents. It's nothing. It's a token. It's just to put up a slight little bit of shielding from the great unwashed. You get terrible pushback. So thank you for watching. This is a remarkable story of graft and corruption and lying and trafficking and abuse, and it's horrifying. So on that happy note, thanks for watching. I'll be back. Slán go fóill. Sláinte.